Hello, photographers. It's Leon, your host, and today I get to share with you a cool conversation I had with Sage Justice, wedding photographer from San Diego. Sage admits he's got a problem with having too much camera gear, and I thought he'd actually be a great person to talk to on the topic of building your kit. As a brand new photographer, it's easy to be overwhelmed with decisions about gear, not only lens and camera choices, but how that affects you financially. Should you borrow, rent, or just get a credit card and go into massive debt to get the gear you need to shoot professionally? We share our thoughts and strategies on the subject, and I hope you will enjoy. Sage, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Let's jump in. Why don't you tell everybody about yourself? What is your thing? What do you do? And what do you do for work and what do you do for fun?
Thanks for having me on, man. This is, I had a lot of fun when we did this last time for the conference. What conference was that? It was
WPPI. We were in Vegas.
Yeah, that's right. And so, I had a lot of fun. So this is, I'm glad you're having me on again. Anyway, so my name is Sage Justice. I'm a wedding photographer. I shoot primarily weddings. I'll dabble in some corporate on the side. But mostly weddings, couples, kind of, lifestyle and stuff like that. I like, live music and kind of hanging out on the weekends when I don't have work. And, I guess some personal photography on the side. And guess I like to work out sometimes too, go on some hikes. What about you?
Nice.
What do you usually do for fun, Leon?
Well, I can often be found at the beach throwing the ball for my dog, hanging out with my kids, my wife. There's a lot of beach time involved for us. I also do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I train 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It's martial arts and, kind of specializing in grappling. And that's been a real fun hobby for me because everything that I do with work is digital. Like if we had a major power outage today, I would not be able to get much work done. So to be able to step away from the desk and do something as a hobby that really requires me to unplug and put my phone away is a great thing. So doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been amazing because it's really, really challenged me physically, mentally, and it takes me away from the computer, which I love.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that later down the line. I used to do martial arts way back when, like years ago, and I just haven't picked it up again once I moved. So it'd be nice to get back into that.
Yeah, dude, I love it. It's been a huge thing for me in the last about 5 years I've been training. So, but yeah, we'll talk about that off air for sure, man. Talk to me about when you started shooting weddings. How many years ago was that? What year? Do you remember?
So I started out I started out third shooting, where I was literally like, they'd probably use 3 of my photos from a wedding, from an 8-hour wedding. And I started doing that in 2009. And I had like a D5000 with a kit lens, 1855. And then I kind of slowly progressed to second shooting. It's when I moved to Canon and I had a 5D2, and kind of a 2470, and I'd borrow some lenses here and there, and I was second shooting. And then I started full-time first shooting in 2012.
Nice. And how was it that you landed on wedding photography? Of all of the different things that you could choose to shoot, how was it wedding photography that drew you in?
So I actually, when I first started in 2009, I was shooting, of all things, nightlife. And I don't know if you've ever shot nightlife, but it's not lucrative at all. It's pretty much the easiest genre. You throw an on-camera flash on your camera, throw your camera in auto, and just shoot people being drunk and whatever. And
they pay you in access and concert tickets and drinks, probably, right?
Basically, I worked for this company, and I'd get $15 an hour, and so I kind of did that and figured out I wasn't making enough money. And then I talked to a photo friend at the time, and he was doing weddings full time. And he basically said, like, if you want to be a full-time photographer, weddings are one of the only ways you can make it. So that kind of stuck with me, and kind of translated to me doing more couple work, and then ultimately doing most of my work for weddings.
Cool. All right. So today we're talking about buying gear. And I think this is a really interesting topic because there's so much at stake when people are brand new to photography. They could kind of go down one of two paths. And, as a new photographer, you do need the proper gear to separate yourself and separate your images from the casual photographer. But as in most businesses, you really don't have a lot of cash in the beginning to invest into a full kit. So I want to hear your story. When you started out as a photographer, what was in your gear bag? Like, what was your first kit?
So my first kit, and this is actually one of the things I wanted to talk about, is it was, I didn't do it the right way. And hopefully I can sway a few people that are listening to kind of get a jump start and do things the right way.
Nice.
So when I started, I was Nikon. I had a D5000, and then I told you I had the 18-55, and I had this bird watcher. I think it was like a 55 to 300 or something crazy. Totally useless.
The massive zoom.
Yeah, exactly. It was like 5.6 to 11 or something. And so I had those two lenses, and I was kind of doing research on buying more lenses and figuring out that, if I wanted to invest more into glass, I'd either have to buy more, crop sensor lenses or buy like a upgrade to a full frame camera, and then I could start investing. So I actually bought a few I think I bought like a 50, that translated to like an 85 or something. And I ultimately wasted a lot of money in doing that. And, by the time I realized that, I kind of just sold everything off. I went Canon. So I went and got a 5D Mark II, and then I got a 24-70, to start. And I think that, when you start out, I think it's nice to kind of cover all your bases, and kind of, even if you do like shooting primes, getting something like a 24-70 and a 7200 is really beneficial, because it lets you, literally do anything that, you can do weddings with a 24-70 and a 7200. You can do corporate, you can do portraits. So it kind of opens you up to a nice variety of things.
Yeah, totally. So I think there are really two ends of the spectrum when it comes to buying gear as a new photographer. On one end of that spectrum, you can go slow, where you just use whatever you have, whatever you can afford. And so you maybe have just the bare bones, maybe a kit lens, maybe kind of a basic SLR. And so you just go slow, and you put money back in your business, and slowly you build your lenses and your bodies and all that stuff. And then the other end of the spectrum is where you just kind of get a credit card and you just blow $10,000 or $15,000 and you just go all in, all chips in. How was it that you went about building your gear? You gave us a little bit of insight. You kind of started down one path and then kind of ditched it and went another. But where were you on that scale? Was it kind of slow? Was it fast? Was it somewhere in between?
Yeah, so it was a little slow to start out. Like I said, I got the 24-70. And then I realized I wanted to do more portraits, so I ended up getting another 50. That was like a true 50, in full frame. And I realized, once I started, accepting money for shoots, and I had a little bit extra money to spend, instead of, I just kind of felt like it was necessary to buy one thing I needed at a time. So, I'd do a shoot, and then I could afford maybe half of the lens. So I'd do 2 shoots, and I could buy a 7200 or something. So I think if I remember right, it was like the 2 zoom lenses, 24-70 and a 7200. And then I just kind of added on 50 and 35, and then kind of went on from there. I personally have way too much gear. So I wouldn't be the best person to ask like for for something that's on a budget, but say if you're shooting portraits primarily, I think it would be advantageous to go and get like a 50, something to separate you from the crowd if you can shoot at a little lower f-stop or something. But
sure,
I guess
when I first started out, when I first started out as a wedding photographer, I would rent gear. I rented a lot of gear, and this was ancient days. I mean, this is last century. We're talking like 98, 99, maybe early 2000s. Yeah. So in the beginning, I only had, like a real consumer level Canon SLR, and we're still talking film days, Sage. That's how old I am. So I had a film camera that was just kind of basic, and it just had a kit lens. But as I started shooting weddings, I would rent gear from a local place in San Diego. They kind of had everything that you could ever hope for in regards to lenses and bodies and stuff like that. It added up really quick. I mean, it seems pretty cheap to rent a body or rent a lens, but when you kind of put together the ultimate kit for shooting a wedding, it's kind of expensive. And so I got to a point where I realized, I'm spending enough money and I'm shooting these weddings enough regularly that I think it's just time to start setting money aside. And I think the turning point for me was that I felt like I was almost turning down jobs because I wasn't able to secure a lens in that amount of time. Like somebody would say, hey, I need somebody to do senior portraits for my kid. Would you be able to shoot like next week sometime? And I'd just be like, I can't really go rent that lens. It's just, I wouldn't explain that to the client, but I felt like there were moments where I was feeling like I had to make a decision either to shoot with my kit lens or to go rent some gear. And that's when I decided to invest in a 70 to 200. That was my first really good lens that I bought. And it's actually still with me today. I think I bought that in maybe the year 2001. Maybe 2000. And I've never sent it into Canon. I've just taken really good care of it. And it's still just amazing. That's probably my favorite lens ever. But so renting is an option. Did you ever rent gear?
I honestly, I think that's the best route to go, especially when you're first starting out and you might not have, $2,000 to drop on a 7200. But I never personally did. And it was just something that, I felt like if I was going to waste the money renting something, that I might as well just put it towards a lens.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, today it's so convenient, so nice that there are so many online rental companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can probably think of 5 or 6 just off the top of my head. And so it's nice that they'll mail you a box with your rented gear and you're good to go. Recently, I took a trip as a photographer for a medical team, and I needed to do video and stills. I was covered with the stills on gear, but I really wanted to have a smaller camera for video, and so I rented one from Borrow Lenses, and I rented a couple other little accessories and stuff, and it was a great experience, fantastic experience. The only downside is that, it starts to add up fast, but the shipping adds up really, really fast too. I mean, this is like guaranteed, insured shipping, and it's not cheap. So if you wanted to rent let's say a $50 lens, you're probably still paying $50 or $40 on shipping alone.
Yep.
And so that's the only downside to renting is it really does get pricey. But on the upside, if you have a little cash, you can experiment with that and see if you like that lens or that body and, if it works for you. Did you, I thought you maybe mentioned borrowing. Did you borrow gear from friends in the beginning?
I did. And that's probably what was also holding me back from renting gear is, my mindset was why spend $100 on renting something for the weekend when I could just bug my buddy and get something for free, And so, we'd go to a wedding, and since I was Canon at the time, he would just let me borrow whatever primes he had. And so I kind of got to play around with, the 35 and the 24 and the 85.
That's great.
Yeah. So that helped a lot.
Hey, a quick break just to let you know that this show is brought to you by Essential Edit, editing and design for photographers just like you. Yes, Lightroom editing, retouching, and album design, all done to your spec, your style, so that you can focus on the essentials of your business. Instead of dreading the edit, spend that time booking more clients, networking with vendors, or spending more time with the people you love. It's super affordable, 3 to 5 day turnaround, friendliest service on the planet, and yes, satisfaction is always guaranteed. Let's get you started. Send us some sample images at essentialedit.com. Enjoy the rest of the show. So looking back, how would you have gone about things differently? How would you have built your kit differently?
Oh, man. I think I definitely would have... see, my problem was that I bought a I went to Nikon, I bought something with one slot that was cropped, and then I realized I wanted full frame. So I switched to Canon, and then I ended up switching back to Nikon. So I would have done, a little bit more research on which camera brand I wanted and kind of why I wanted to go that route. Say Canon for skin tones or for, better looking portraits, and Nikon for like autofocus or ISO or whatever. So I think it's definitely worth it to just take that extra, few months and even rent a body and just experiment and see which files you like, versus wasting all the money buying it, into one brand and then having to sell everything off and buy into another. So I definitely, research and make sure which brand I was going with was the one I wanted to stay with. And then I'd also, lens choice is huge when you're doing that too. It's like, if you're an architectural shooter, Canon's the way to go. I think they have 3 or 4 tilt shift lenses. They're, way more inexpensive versus the Nikon ones, which are like ridiculous.
You need a personal loan for.
Exactly. Sell a kidney or two. So it just depends, what genre you are. Do the research, make sure you don't buy into a brand that you're going to want to switch out of in a year. And then, like glass costs, again, that's a big factor. I don't know. I kind of went off on a tangent again. Did I answer?
No, that's good. I think, just to kind of bring it to a recent situation for myself in thinking about putting together a podcast, I tend to overthink everything when it comes to new ideas. And so when I started thinking about a podcast, I started thinking, oh man, do I need to build myself a little studio? And am I going to need, all this, acoustic coverings for the walls and, all the gear, the mixer and all. I started thinking grand stuff. And so I decided to forget about that and just realize that I need to start with something super basic. The one thing I didn't want to budge on was a good microphone. And, so I decided to do some research, right? Like I knew that going with like the Snowball or whatever is kind of like the basic, like one that everybody gets for their podcast. But I just wanted to see what could I buy that was maybe a little bump above that, but had a great review and just, had a great reputation for being an awesome mic. And so I spent a little bit more than maybe I should have in the initial investment on doing the podcast, but I figured having a great microphone up front would help separate me from, just having, just using like my iPhone earbuds or something, right? Like if you're going to host a podcast, it should sound pretty good.
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad that I did that. And I realized that when it comes to buying camera gear, I've kind of done the opposite. I kind of bought something that I could afford, but that only lasted me for a little while. And then I ended up, putting that in the closet. Now it collects dust and I ended up paying for the real item anyway. And so I feel like I finally learned my lesson with the podcast where I said, okay, I'm just going to buy the better microphone up front. Because I don't want to spend 3 times the amount of money that I would have by buying the cheap one first and then letting it collect dust, right? Because I'm never really going to take that and like sell it to somebody. There's no real resale value on it. Lenses, of course, and bodies, yes, there's some resale value, but I think that's kind of a philosophical thing. If you can pull together some money to buy the good lens or the good body up front, then you kind of save yourself the hassle of maybe buying the lesser gear and dealing with that for a little while, and then actually just blowing a ton more money on the gear you should have had in the beginning. So I like that philosophy. I hear what you're saying, and I think that's good insight. So let's go like kind of opposite direction. Like if now that you are kind of this gearhead, you love having a ton of gear, if you could shoot a wedding with only one lens for the entire day, which one would it be and why?
I really want to answer this question, but I want to backpedal. That's actually a really fantastic point of view is buying something that you're going to grow into. Because, that was my main point is when I went from the Nikon, the crop sensor, and I got the Mark II, I wasn't even doing paid work when I got the Mark II. And, my main goal was, getting something that I could grow into. And, I didn't even know how to fully shoot in manual at that point. And getting that Mark II and kind of, allowing me to play around with it and all the, custom dials and, tweaking white balance, way easier than I could on the D5000. Just stuff like that really helped me learn and kind of helped me get my feet in the water for paid work. Anyway, so shooting a wedding with one lens. I have my 35 1.4 glued to one of my bodies almost the entire wedding, so it definitely be a 35.
Nice. I've been out of shooting weddings for many, many years, but when I did shoot weddings, I pretty much only did shoot with one lens, and it was because I always had a second shooter with me, and their purpose really was to capture more of the vibe and look and feel of the event, and so they had a wider angle lens. I did switch lenses, of course, but I felt like the majority of everything I shot was with my 70 to 200. For me personally, I don't know why, that just everything I shoot with a 70 to 200 feels right. Other lenses that I put on, works and I get what I need, but I'm always kind of itching to get that 70 to 200 back on the camera. What are your thoughts on prime lenses versus zoom lenses? Where do you land on philosophy with those?
So I know I just talked your ear off about, those two zoom lenses, the 24-70 and 70-200. But I'm actually against using zoom lenses for weddings. And the reason being is I really like to, one, with primes, you're always using your feet to essentially zoom. So just moving around and finding different angles really gets you out of your zone, or puts you in the zone and kind of lets you be more creative than you normally be. It also makes me feel a little less lazy. I don't know why, but I've always felt like with the 24-70, it's kind of cheating. So yeah, as soon as I kind of got, into I actually use a combo of a 35 and a 58. It's kind of an odd combo. It's usually like a 58 and a 24 or a 35 and a 85. But for whatever reason, I just really like those two lenses together. And I'll shoot a majority of my photojournalism with the 35. And then the 58 is fantastic for portraits and kind of has the extra reach that the 35 doesn't. But in the same token, I actually associate shot a wedding this past weekend, and they don't like you using two camera bodies because it interferes with their card system somehow, or labeling the files for each shooter. So I had to use one lens because using a prime on one, if you're only shooting one camera body, is kind of dangerous, something can happen that's immediate at a wedding, and if you don't have that extra reach or a wide enough lens, then you're kind of screwed. I actually ended up using a 24-70 for this past wedding, and it kind of hit all the right notes.
Yeah, cool. Now, do you, having all this gear, do you have a backup kit?
So just in terms of lenses, I don't know if you wanted me to list everything I have, but it definitely allows me to be redundant with most of the stuff that I use. So I think I have 3 variations of the 24, just 24 in general. I have a 14 and 24, a 24-70, and then a 24 prime. So I always have something wide angle. I don't know. It just depends. Like I said, the 58's one of my most used lenses, and I have the 58, I have a 24-70, which hits that 58 spot. And, I also have a 60, which is a macro, but it would probably do the same job if I needed it.
Yeah. So if your camera, everybody's probably seen that famous video of the photographer who's kind of walking backwards as I think it's a bride is walking with the groom on a walkway next to the water. Yeah. And, or this lady, she falls into the water, like the photographer, she's just completely dunked. She walks backwards off of the walkway into the lake or whatever that they're next to. So let's say that's you. God forbid it ever happens, but if that happens to you, you're backed up. You have another kit in the bag or in the trunk that's ready to go. So that wet camera can be set aside and you can continue to move on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. And I think that's super important when you're doing paid work, always having kind of a plan B or C.
Yeah. Oh, and this is almost like kind of a random question, but it's still relevant here. What is your philosophy with memory cards. There are some people who like to have the largest memory card possible. They just don't want to swap cards all during the day and manage, multiple cards. And then there are other people who say it's too much of a risk for me. I am just going to have small cards, and that way if I lose one, then I've only lost a little bit of the day. Where do you land?
Yeah, so I've kind of approached those from both mindsets, and I don't really see the point in doing smaller cards nowadays. We have really large we can have I think up to 256 megabit cards. Maybe they're bigger now. I like to shoot on 64 gigabyte on redundant, so on dual slots. But I typically can shoot most of a wedding on 164 gigabyte card, and I never pull it out of my camera. And I think that when you're shooting with smaller cards, 16, 32 gig, and you're shooting a full wedding, pulling out cards and, just having the chance to corrupt one or lose one, is just, amplified when you're doing that. So it's just it's silly to me, nowadays when cards are faster and bigger to not shoot on bigger cards.
I personally agree. I would much rather have a gigantic card in my camera and not have to worry about running out of space and managing that. A little random story from my days of shooting. In the days of film, you had 36 shots on a roll. And I remember this one time, this couple was really, really cool, and they got married in this really cool church, but they wanted to do some quick photos at Balboa Park. And it was a really, really tight schedule. So that day we really had almost no time. It was just kind of unreal that they wanted to go from the church to Balboa Park and then to their reception. So I get out of the church. They get into their limo, whatever. I was shooting indoor. Okay. So I'm shooting with a high ISO film. And my wife was shooting with me. She caught some photos of them getting into the limo. Off we go. We're supposed to follow them. And I remember thinking at that moment, I'm going to put a roll of film in my camera right now because I need to pull this high ISO out, and I'm going to go decide what to use when we get to Balboa Park. So we get to Balboa Park, and my wife's driving, and I say, there's no time for parking. Like, just drop me off here. I'll go shoot with them, and I'll be right back. In the heat of the moment, I forgot about my choice to decide on film. And I didn't actually load any film in the camera. Went out to the Oregon Pavilion, shot all these amazing photos. The couple is like dancing around, and it's films. I'm not like seeing the preview on the back of the camera. There's no notice to tell me, no card in camera or anything. And so I shot all these photos. It was like amazing. Okay, great job, guys. Let's go to the reception. I get to the reception, and I realize when I look down at my camera to see how many frames I have left, I go, I had no film in the camera. That's a rare situation for today's cameras. Most of them will tell you when you don't have a card in it. But I just feel like when you have small cards and you're like trying to manage, okay, where do these cards go and what order are they marked? And, I feel like for me personally, the management of multiple cards at a wedding is just too much for my little monkey brain to handle. So I would much rather have a big card and just go, that was the card from the day from that camera. Here, let's just download all the photos and, deal with it accordingly. Yeah. So I'm with you, man. I'm kind of the same mindset. Now, mirrorless cameras are kind of the hot item right now. Everybody's loving the Fuji or the Sony mirrorless cameras. Have you tinkered with them, and do you think that you might ever add one to your kit anytime soon?
Oh yeah. So obviously mirrorless is the future, and DSLRs, it's just a matter of time before they're just out, and they're going to be the film cameras of today's age. But I'd love to invest in a mirrorless system at this point. Just for personal reasons, I have a little arthritis in my shoulder. It would definitely help with that. And just the fact that they're so damn quiet. I mean, you can shoot in a church and be virtually undetected. But see, the two things, say you go the Fuji route and you're shooting with a little smaller sensor. Just that lack of depth of field is enough to not have me fully switch and convert. I mean, they're fantastic cameras. They have great color, great autofocus. I mean, they're great for pretty much everything. But for somebody that wants, to sometimes like throw the background completely out of focus and kind of get rid of those Cheetos bags and 7-Eleven cups in the bridesmaids room, you can't do that with a 35 1.4 from, or I guess it would be the 23 1.4 from Fuji. It just doesn't work. Say you go the Sony route and you're, shooting with the smaller, like the A7 or the A9 bodies.
Yeah.
And, the lenses, unless you're going Sony and you're getting those smaller Sony lenses, they're just as big as Canon or Nikon. So the weight you're saving is very minimal, in my opinion, at least from what I've looked at. And, until they get that figured out with, maybe they can develop some type of microsonic motor and have a Leica size lens, and throw that on like a Sony, I'd be game for that. And I'd just shut up and take my money. But until then, I'm still going to be rocking the DSLR and until that's figured out.
Totally. I had a chance to use the Canon M5 on a trip I took recently as a photographer with a medical team. We went to Fiji. The medical team was providing surgeries and medical services to the islands, and they brought me along as their photographer to document their work. I was to shoot.
That's an awesome gig.
It was an awesome gig. It was super fun. It was a total paradise and, lots of emotional ups and downs and lots of new experiences. I'd never been in an OR before and never been able to observe such a thing. So it was a real treat to be a part of that. But, in going into this, they wanted video and they also wanted stills. With the stills, I felt super confident. I love shooting with the 1DX. For me, it's just a weird thing. I have big hands. I love having a substantial camera that I can grab onto, has a vertical grip. I just feel really comfortable with that style of body. However, I have done video projects in the past with the 1DX. Beautiful video. It's great. Downside is it doesn't have autofocus when you're in video mode, and it's super, super heavy. I remember shooting a documentary for a nonprofit, and it was a day and a half of shooting, and my back was destroyed from the weight of carrying that camera around to shoot video. I mean, it's one thing when it's up to your eyeball. I feel like your posture is a little different, but when you're shooting video and you got to look at the screen, it's different. So it just messes with your body a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, let me just go rent an M5 and the adapter so I can use all my L lenses. And the thing was amazing. It was perfect for video. It was absolutely perfect. I did shoot stills with it occasionally. The only thing I didn't really like, and I don't know if this is just the Canon M5 thing, and the Leicas and the Fujis and Sonys are different, but there still felt like there was a lag between when I hit the shutter and when it actually took. I didn't like that. With my 1DX, it's immediate. I can just fire away and there's no lag time at all. With the mirrorless, even though it was quiet and it was, really small and compact and really lightweight, I just didn't love it yet as a still camera. So that's where I kind of land on mirrorless. I feel like, yeah, you're right that they are the future. But at the moment, for me personally, shooting stills, at least with the M5, I was not super impressed on the speed. The video was great. All that was great. But, shooting stills, I still felt like I just needed to grab the 1DX.
Yeah. The speed, I haven't used the M5, but the Sony A9, I mean, Ryan Brenizer just put out a review on that, and apparently the speed is just stupid fast.
Good to hear.
And, yeah, so it just, I guess it just depends on which brand and what body you're using.
Yeah. I mean, I know that the M5 has not been like, super well received by the community. Most people are like, yeah, we're just going to wait on the Canon mirrorless for a while because they need to do some catching up. I'm just such a loyalist with Canon. I just was like, well, I'm going to try it out. It's a rental and, I can send it back when I'm done. But, yeah, I think you're right. I think that mirrorless cameras are going to come a long way in the next couple of years. And I think a lot of people will be replacing their standard digital SLR with mirrorless cameras. So what's next on your list? What's the one item that you're excited to acquire, if there is something?
Oh, man. So I'm actually in the process of selling my strobes. And this is, it's not like a lens or anything. But yeah, just, I'm getting rid of kind of my old archaic Alien B kind of. I have a Einstein, Pulsey Buff Einstein, and I have a Pulsey Buff White Lightning. And they're fantastic strobes. They're reliable, they're bright. They can overpower the sun. They have, fast flash duration, and they can, they're consistent, whatever. But I'm actually looking at the Flashpoint Explorer 600s. And I don't know if you've seen those.
I haven't.
Okay, so they're actually they're like B1, like Profoto B1 competitors. And I've seen a few reviews. Actually, my friend Rob Hall did a review and compared the two. And essentially, the flash output is very similar. The color consistency is similar. They both have a built-in battery pack. The rechargeable battery. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The Explorers have a built-in transceiver, and they all work with the same, like receiver and transmitter and whatnot. And then they have high-speed sync, so you can shoot, portraits at 1.4 or whatever, or you can shoot in midday sun and not have to be limited to f200. Or sorry, 1/200 shutter. So yeah, they're great little lights, and they're pretty cheap for what they offer.
Cool. So it's not so much in the lens or body category; it's in the lighting category. That's cool. Good to hear. Well, good stuff, man. What a great conversation to have. I love talking shop, and I love talking gear, and I think you are the right guy to talk with on this topic. So where can people find you, and how can they see your work?
So my Instagram is Instagram at Justice Photography, or so it's Justice Photo, JUSTICEPHOTO, and I'm like that for pretty much every social media. Facebook's Justice Photo, Instagram is Justice Photo, Pinterest, and nobody uses Pinterest, but Pinterest is Justice Photo. So yeah, you can find me with that.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate all of your insight. And man, I hope that some people are taking notes, and maybe some people early in their journey are able to redirect and make some smart choices based on the insight that you've given us today. So thanks so much for being with me, man. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on.
Of course. Take care.
You too.